a key driver for us is enabling all the grid benefits, but also just helping a consumer lower their energy bill, manage their energy use, and do that in a simpler way versus getting really complicated, because you
Yeah.
can get really complicated quickly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Clean Techies, the podcast. This is episode 40, and today's conversation is with Aaron Berndt, the head of energy and industry partnerships at Google Nest. Google Nest is a Google acquisition that has a thermostat known as the Nest that helps homeowners participate in their local utilities' energy demand reduction programs, which oftentimes essentially helps them save or earn money. So this conversation largely was focused on the benefit of this technology for the grid, once it has a large penetration across the grid, how the residential energy market can really help to increase grid flexibility and resiliency. That was a very fascinating aspect. And there's a lot of other things we went into with Aaron. It was a really interesting conversation, so I really hope you enjoy it. Before we do get into the show, of course, we want to make mention to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition and recruitment across climate tech, renewables, and ESG globally. So if your team is growing or you are looking to potentially make a career change, you can reach out to NextWave through their website at next-wavepartners.com. Or you can reach out to one of their consultants directly through their LinkedIn page. Maybe go to their website, identify which consultant makes most sense for you to reach out to in your region and in your area, and reach out to them for a discussion. So without any further delays, let's get into the show.
All right. Welcome to the show, Aaron. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Great to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to have you on the show. So I guess why don't we have you just kind of give yourself a quick introduction, kind of what you do now, kind of how you ended up where you are. We're really keen to understand kind of your journey into climate space.
Sure. So Aaron Berndt, I head up Nest's energy industry partnerships team. Been with the company for just over 6 years now, and we really focus on helping accelerate our partners' demand side management programs, whether that's energy efficiency programs, demand response programs, really all across the country. And what we found is that when you pair energy savings programs with utilities with products that customers actually really want and looking forward to adopting, you can really accelerate the market. And so that's really what we've been focused on over the last 6-7 years.
Mm-hmm. And so how did you end up into this space? Like what ended up leading you to Nest?
So I went to UC Berkeley for my MBA back in 2008 is when I started that. And back then, climate change and clean tech were big buzzwords in the venture community. That was really kind of the first initial wave of all the VC funding going in the clean. So it was just super interested in kind of all the stuff that was going on there. And I have an engineering background and then got an MBA. So just felt like I could join into that space and have a big impact because I kind of knew at least enough on the technology front, but then can help connect the dots on the business side of things. And then went from business school to Pacific Gas and Electric, actually. So kind of the opposite of what you would think of as a fast-growing technology startup. But I'm super thankful for the time that I had there, because I spent the entire time there working in their energy efficiency programs, and California has some of the biggest programs in the country by far. And really got a deep understanding of how the industry worked, how utility planning works, how utility regulation works, and honestly wasn't planning on leaving PG&E, but we were looking for a little bit more of a flexible lifestyle. We wanted to spend summers in Minnesota and live somewhere else the rest of the year, and I just knew that wasn't possible at PG&E. So I had some former colleagues at PG&E on the Nest team, and just happened to get in touch with them at the right time frame and started shortly after that. It was right when we were starting to scale up our regulated energy channel business. So having the background of working in utility energy efficiency programs really helped kick that off.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's always fascinating to me, especially when people come from what is considered non-innovative places. Again, not to say they aren't innovative, but they're just not like the forefront of your mind when you think of innovative companies.
Yeah.
But the knowledge you probably learned there, I'm assuming, has been extremely helpful for you in your current role and actually being able to really make a big impact. So maybe why don't we do this? Could you maybe break down a little bit when you say things like energy demand response? Could you kind of help us to understand just the lay of the land? What exactly does all that mean, and
So
how does it all work?
sure. So the the easiest side of things is the energy efficiency component is just purely what energy savings our products can help drive. So um, on average, our thermostats will save 10 to 12% of a customer's heating usage and roughly 15% on AC usage. So, you go out to the shop, pick one up, install it. The smarts within inside the thermostat are going to drive those energy savings. And the reason utilities have those programs is they're, regulated utilities, and many of them will have mandated state level targets to hit certain levels
Mhm.
of energy efficiency. And the whole reason that they do that is it's way more efficient not to build a new power plant if you don't need to. So that's always been kind of a key driver for our business is just the basic energy savings of our devices. And ever since the beginning of Nest, um, we knew that our technology could help easily save energy, and that the easy component of that is important because you can do a whole bunch of different things within your home to save energy, but it's a lot of work, it's expensive, and it can be intrusive if you're adding in new insulation, all this kind of stuff. So there's all sorts of different ways to do it. We just like to make it as easy as possible, so adopt our technology, we can help drive energy efficiency savings. So that's kind of the first. And then on demand response, demand response as a concept has been around for many, many years. It easily a couple of decades, maybe longer. I'm not 100% sure when it exactly started. But it's basically the notion that when either the utility or the grid operator sees system constraints on the grid, meaning supply isn't quite where it needs to be with the demand of energy usage, they can actually call on customers to reduce. And those programs will span from commercial, industrial, and residential customers. The early demand response definitely started with the big industrial customers where they literally just
Mhm.
picked up the phone to their biggest industrial customers, said, hey, could you cut back? Like, we really need you. And they would pay them a lot to do that. I mean, obviously shutting down a part of your business is expensive, so they would want to be compensated to do that. But as those programs have evolved, they become automated, simplified, and then scaled down to commercial and residential. So what it means for a residential consumer is mostly it's thermostat based, and our thermostats, but then also other OEM thermostats can be enrolled in the utility program and get paid from them for participating. So, for uh, Southern California Edison, as an example, out in California, we've long had a program with them. You can earn, I think it's currently $75 for enrolling in their program, and you get that as a bill credit or a check, and then you earn on an ongoing basis for participating. But what that gives is Edison the capability to run some number of events. It might be 12, 15, 20, something like that. And and they will increase your temperature set point for a defined period. It could be a 2-hour event, maybe it's a 4-hour event. So you'll give up a little bit of control and comfort for really helping out the grid and getting paid to do so. And that's one of the key things that we really see a ton of opportunity to help balance the intermittency of renewable
Yeah.
energy with more flexible grid. So as more and more of those are coming online, we will need more capabilities to offset that kind of those dynamics.
So do you have data points on what percentage of like grid demand is from residential energy usage?
It definitely varies by market.
Yeah.
One off the top of my head, just because have been recently looking at it, is in Texas, uh, in ERCOT market in summertime. The latest numbers that I saw from ERCOT was the residential total portion of the demand is almost half. So
Really?
it's way bigger than you would know, like just by thinking about it. I definitely didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal in summer, but summer Texas residential AC load plays a huge driver
Mhm.
in how much capacity energy ERCOT really needs to serve the market in summer. In winter, it definitely drops down quite a bit, but
Mhm.
at least in summer, it plays a huge chunk.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So basically, generally speaking, it's essentially the utility getting a bit of access, right? If we go through the history, you said, back in the early days, they would just call somebody and say, "Hey, turn your power off. We'll pay you for it," right?
Yep.
In order to
Yep.
not have any issues with the grid. Maybe would be curious to know, do you know typically what tend to be the consequences if that doesn't happen, right? Does somebody just get blackouts kind of unintentionally, or are there actual costs that happen, like bad things that happen to the grid?
Oh, you mean if they can't run the event, or if they just don't have enough
Yeah,
capacity?
if
Yeah,
if there's just
if
not enough power to
yeah,
go
if
around.
basically and I'm not an electrical engineer, so I won't get this perfect, but my understanding of it is the reason that grid operators need to match supply and demand so carefully has to do with the frequency of the grid. And when those are
Mhm.
off enough, the you're basically just get out of the frequency
Okay.
range, and then stuff starts automatically shutting down so that the whole thing doesn't go black.
Okay.
And so most
Pro-
of the time, what
yeah.
they're doing is they have a bunch of different signals and programs in place where they can ramp power plants up and down to kind of meet that demand. But depending on what's available and what's running, like
Mhm.
may need more levers to really get all
Yeah.
that balancing in place.
Got it. Okay. So basically, it sounds is generally though that the power grid it's essentially originally designed just to go to homes, right? It's to go out, right, and hopefully absorb the demand, the supply equals the demand, right? And
Yep.
it sounds like essentially what Nest is able to do is help homeowners be part of that, right? On a large scale,
Yep.
probably where they're reducing demand. So does this, I would guess that not only are they going to get maybe some credits from the states and utilities that have these things for using these thermostats, but are they also going to be earning a lot of savings in their actual energy usage on top of that?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you go back to the energy efficiency comments I was talking about earlier, even with our most expensive thermostat, which is $249, consumers can pay for that within 2 years just from the energy savings
Mm-hmm.
itself. So now we have a lower cost thermostat at $129. So it should be faster payoff than that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a key driver for us is enabling all the grid benefits, but also just helping a consumer lower their energy bill, manage their energy use, and do that in a simpler way versus getting really complicated, because you
Yeah.
can get really complicated quickly.
Yeah, I can assume there's probably many options, right? There's probably a bunch of levers even within one home, right? You could do work on. What is you mentioned that the install process is super easy. I would assume that would be something that's quite difficult, but could you kind of like walk us through how does that typically work?
Yeah, totally. And that was the other innovation, if you will, that Nest came up with back when we launched the first thermostat, was to make a do-it-yourself, beautiful, awesome thermostat that you actually wanted to buy. And back when Nest was in the early days, it was like reinventing unloved products, which is
Mm-hmm.
what we talked about quite a bit. Because most people don't think about their thermostat, and still there's plenty of people that still don't pay attention to their thermostat. And even before I got one, I was questioning, like, what difference is it really, like, how is it really going to matter? But as soon as you have the capability to just open up your app, change the temperature on your thermostat, you're like, oh yeah, this is actually super nice. um, but in terms of the installation, the DIY was really important up front. And the way that we did that is we had a few different features built into the thermostat to help ensure that it's getting enough power from your system. So you didn't necessarily need to have a power wire running to it. It'll
Mm-hmm.
effectively borrow power from your HVAC unit to help do that. And what that does is it simplifies the wiring and the process so that most consumers can install that. And the data that we've found directly from our consumers is most customers on average can install it in about 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So it is really pretty straightforward. There are still plenty of people that don't want to do that. And, we'll work with our Nest Pros in market, like their HVAC Pros, or a utility program that might have an installation component of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, so that's very straightforward. What about when homeowners have Nest and they have, say, for example, they have maybe a Tesla Powerwall and a Tesla solar roof, right? Like, what does this integrate with them to help maybe switch off power or pull from that at their time? And how does that typically look if you're able to share?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at this point, it doesn't, but we do have longer term visions for how we can be doing more within the connected home. As more EVs come online, more storage comes online. Is there a world where Nest could be helping consumers connect all that stuff? We have platforms like Google Assistant where we have millions and millions of smart devices connected in through Google Assistant that we're helping consumers manage their smart home that way. So we do see a lot of potential there, but right now it's still largely focused on the thermostat and working towards more sophisticated options for customers there.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe talk about, you mentioned demand flexibility. Could you maybe talk about what can having greater demand flexibility within the grid, like what can the results really be? Can you maybe give some examples of negative things that have happened in the recent past within the US grid or areas that you can relate that could have been avoided from this? Like, could you just kind of talk about what the actual benefits of that are?
Yep. So the two that I talk about a lot are California and Texas. I'm not 100% sure that demand response would have completely solved Texas because there was a colossal gap in terms of capacity needed. But in California, it wasn't quite as stark. But in California, I think it was in 2020, they had rolling blackouts in the summer, which had a major economic impact on the state. And shortly thereafter, the governor and the CPUC put in a whole bunch of different initiatives in place to specifically come up and ramp new demand side flexibility capabilities versus, say, just go build a ton of new gas plants, which is kind of what Texas is trying to figure out how to go do. But in a perfect world, if California had the 8+ million central AC units that it has in its footprint, if every single one of those had a smart thermostat of some sort and was connected and rolled into a demand response program, that would be close to 8 gigawatts of power that they would have the ability to flex around. So like it's a non-trivial amount, and obviously getting to 100% penetration is a long shot, but even if you get into half or a third, like that's a major lever that the utility and grid operators can be pulling to help ensure that they're meeting those. And what depending on the market that you're in, every single grid will get to some sort of emergency state where it needs big loads to pull back so that they can get those buy-in. The benefit is the way that a lot of utilities and states will handle this now is they may have DR programs and they will dispatch those, but they're relatively small in the grand scheme of things. But what they will then do is effectively email and post on social and try to get some other ways, like go on the news and be like, hey, turn down your thermostat. And so they try to get the same outcome, but it's not nearly as effective as having it just automated in the background. So there really is a lot of opportunity to just get consumers engaged. And one interesting and recent statistic that my team dug into recently is we did a survey of all of our rush hour awards, which is just the name of the demand response program that we resell to utilities, a customer satisfaction and net promoter score. And we actually saw a higher net promoter score for consumers that had our thermostat and were enrolled in the demand response program versus just having our thermostat, which doesn't always make a lot of sense. Because if you really think about it, what a demand response program is it makes your house hotter when it's on some of the hottest days. But what we found is consumers feel good about being part of the solution, even if it's a minor adjustment that they're making on their side. They feel like they're part of the solution and really helping out. And that's the intent that we were really trying to figure out how to maximize with all of our partners.
Mm-hmm. Do you find, I was going to ask about that, I think it's in the same vein here. Do you find there's a lot of, or I guess maybe what would the typical resistance be to installing something like this, right? I'm not sure how involved you are with the direct sales team, but what are some of the people's like big objections?
Consumers, I honestly think it's mostly just about awareness and really what the technology can provide. There can certainly be some hesitation around, what do they actually do for me? How, do I need it? As back to the earlier part of our discussion, most people just don't think about their thermostat all that much. So what we really do focus on is helping them, connect the dots to something that they may care about. It may be bill savings. It may be earning some additional dollars from the utility through the demand response. It may be climate change related, and they want to be part of the solution. And for the programs that we support with our utility providers, those utilities will typically have the best offer in market by far for our products. And in many states across the country, you can get free Nest thermostats as long as you enroll in their program. So it's a great way to help kind of introduce them to the connected home, how they can be helping support clean energy, et cetera, in a relatively straightforward way. One of the other key barriers is that we already talked about is just installation. Can I actually install it in 30 minutes? Do I want to? Maybe I don't, and therefore they just don't. So, in those scenarios, that's why we work with a whole bunch of different Nest pros, out in the industry to help. I mean, like when you say you may be replacing your HVAC unit, when they're doing that, they should be upgrading to a smart thermostat, at that time frame, and also ideally leveraging all the different energy programs that are in market. Although that's not always something that helps kind of connect the dots with our contractors. That's an area I would say is room for improvement. And then we're always looking to figure out how to amplify that in market.
What one thing I'm kind of curious about is to what extent will Nest now or maybe in the future be able to feed back data to the utilities, or just, I don't know, to who it would be per se, that could really help inform decisions about future technologies or maybe future programs to run to try to help reduce, again, I'm looking at this mainly from a climate perspective, to help reduce usage or improve different technologies. Like what does that potentially look like now? What is it now and what could it look like potentially?
Yeah, so we do send some data back to utilities. And really when I say some, the reason that we don't send all of it has to do just with data security and data privacy commitments that we have with our consumers. But when a customer enrolls in a demand response program, they are also agreeing to a certain level of data sharing just so that the utility can actually do what's called M&B, the measurement of those programs, and just ensuring that they're getting, the output from it that they need. So we do share M&B data or performance data for those utilities so that they can back up those claims and ensure that they're getting, the outcomes that they're looking for. And the reason that's helpful for the industry is that's, really how the utilities and or grid operators are able to showcase, all right, this is a super cost-effective program. Let's go from, X million dollars to twice that or something like that in our next proceeding, as we do that. So we do spend a lot of time my team in particular, educating stakeholders, regulators, et cetera, on effectively the untapped opportunity, because we're still early in really scaling these programs. They've come a long way in the 6 years that I've joined with Nest. Call it, we used to sign up 1,000-unit pilot programs just to prove out the technology, but now we're definitely much more in the scaling mode. So we have hundreds of thousands of customers engaged, and would love to get to the spot where we have millions, all across the country.
How does it work typically? Because I know you mentioned a lot of times states have kind of mandates for these types of programs. How does it work for maybe parts of the country that the utilities don't do these things? How does something like that get started? Does it typically come from a state legislator where they say, hey, we want to target these things, or can a utility just on its own decide, hey, we want to do these things? The reason I ask mainly is from an action perspective. I know a lot of people talk about federal policy. Hey, let's change this, let's change that. Federal policy is damn near impossible to change. So why not start with a local level? Could you maybe explain how that process looks? Or what the best way to help?
That's a good question, and also something that my team pays close attention to as we're trying to, like, my whole team's goal is to help grow our programs, and that means what can we do to open up new markets. Right now, there's not a lot going on in Florida, for example. There's a ton of opportunity in Florida, but not a lot of that we're doing there. Primarily just because they have really lousy energy efficiency policies, and really the economics for the utility aren't set up properly either. So to be perfectly fair, it's not just in all the California or the Florida utilities' fault, but using California at least as an example, they have what's called decoupling. So PG&E doesn't earn more money selling you more power. They earn a rate of return on their asset base. That's not the case in Florida. So in Florida, we literally would be, if they ran a bunch of energy efficiency programs, they would just be out those revenue dollars. So like it's not in their best interest the way that the system is set up. And usually that would be started as you mentioned, at the legislative level. So like they could be driving some new bills to help say, like, we want to decouple earnings from usage from revenue at the utility level, and we want to set a more ambitious energy efficiency and demand response target to help balance the grid, because it's more cost effective than building new power plants. So that's definitely something that we look at figuring out how can we influence as well.
Yeah. So is that essentially the difference between, for example, CAISO and I don't know if I'm saying the term right, but regulated and deregulated markets?
That's a different dynamic. So if we want to talk about regulated and deregulated, on the regulated side, honestly, it's a little bit easier, because in most states they have some version of decoupling and or a mechanism for the utility to capture those funds back, so they're not disincentivized from doing energy efficiency. And then they have some sort of regulated mandated target that they need to hit. And then the way that those markets work is they file programs, the commission approves them, and then they just start running them. And ideally they hit their goals, and sometimes they ask for more money, all that kind of stuff. In ERCOT, so in a fully competitive market, it is definitely different. Texas technically does have some energy efficiency programs that their transmission and distribution utilities run, but they're super small at this point. They were pretty innovative a decade ago, but they're really kind of behind the time, at least on energy efficiency and demand response programs. And the way that they would monetize demand response is actually through ERCOT. So that's part of the reason why we're heavily engaged, with the Texas PUC and stakeholders, and trying to just educate them on the opportunity of, at a minimum, ensuring that capacity resources and energy resources like demand response are at least evaluated and have
Mhm.
the same capability to engage directly with the ERCOT market so that those partners can earn, a rate of return on those programs. Because otherwise, if they can't, then they're just not economic, and then they just don't exist. And in Texas, there's a huge gap in terms of the potential for residential demand response capability and really what's enrolled.
Yeah.
So pretty similar to the numbers that we were talking about in California. They have around 8 million central AC units.
Mhm.
And these are round numbers, but there's roughly 1 million smart thermostats in Texas. So,
Yeah.
a long way to go just on that front. And then of that million, there's only like 10% of those are enrolled in demand response programs. So it's like a tiny, tiny
Yeah.
footprint. And part of the reason is just they just don't have the right monetization mechanisms in ERCOT for partners to want to run big programs yet.
Yeah, that's super interesting. The entire thing about incentive structures is always interesting to me. This is why I feel like instances like this really make the case to, or at least help strengthen the case for carbon tax, right? Especially for just basically putting into people's mindset, hey, these, using these other energies does cost us extra because of the long-term effects on the climate.
Yeah.
I guess this is kind of on the same branch would be with educating people, because it seems to me that once people start to really understand kind of what's going on here, the more people are educated. Obviously, it seems as though a lot more people are concerned about climate change now.
Yeah.
But once people become more educated about how these things work, I feel like change would likely happen. So, what are some of the things you're seeing, whether it's what Nest is doing or other organizations, on the education side of things, whether that's first-time homeowners, or maybe throughout university or even in high school, educating people about like how some of these things work so they can understand the necessity and maybe push for that in the future?
Yeah. Also think about, broader education for a second there, but at least in terms of kind of what we're doing,
Mhm.
what we really focus on is just making it as easy as possible to make to have an impact, and then also, provide really great, beautiful, awesome working technology and solutions that you want to buy, and that also have a climate impact. And so, that was, essentially the thesis for a lot of what we were doing with when we first launched our thermostats back in the day. But a pretty similar kind of business justification for why we just launched a new service, Nest Renew, which makes it easier for customers to easily support a clean energy future right from your home. And Nest Renew is a new service that's currently not fully rolled out to the country,
Yeah.
but will be pretty soon. And it'll do things like, once you're enrolled, it'll help make slight automatic adjustments in the background to more cleaner times on the grid. So it'll help reduce usage when it's an ineffective time, and wait till the grid is cleaner. So it'll just help shape your load a bit.
Mhm.
Or if you're on a time of use rate, which are a lot more common all across the country now, you'll be able to let us know which rate you're on, and then the thermostat will help optimize your HVAC usage so that you're not, hitting that super expensive peak time period. And we'll try to help move some of that HVAC usage out of that peak period, and we'll just automatically do that for you in the background.
Mhm.
And then, the final component of that, Nest Renew, is for our premium version. You'll actually be able to, upgrade to a program where we'll match your energy use, fossil energy use, with clean energy. So, a lot of consumers, as you mentioned, are paying a lot more attention and care about the climate, but they may not know what to do. And what we want to do is, provide some really straightforward and simple solutions where they can get a thermostat, enroll in Nest Renew, and we can just help make all of that a lot easier, but still have a big impact.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I oftentimes feel, I think I saw many of these things just today when I was looking through those websites. Was there's just so many basic facts that people should learn and to understand, like how, what, for example, I think it said your dishwasher, most of the energy usage comes from the heating of the water. I think that's what it was. Something like that, right? There's basic things that people can understand to be conscious of at least how their appliances work, right? These are basic things, right?
Totally.
It to me seems like something that should just be taught in school, right? If this is an important thing, right? Why not at the very basic level kind of teach people about these things? I also wonder from a talent perspective, have you I feel that this is maybe not an issue. I don't have much of a read on this space specifically, but have you guys been able to find really good talent generally that's kind of has the right education? Are the universities and everything doing a good job of helping people to be basically prepared for these types of roles, or is there a ton of education that you need to do when people come in for some more of these technical related jobs?
Um, I actually do think the industry is starting to lean into that quite a bit. I was just a couple weeks ago at an event at Kellogg University, Climate Cap, talking about a lot of the same stuff that they're talking about here, but to a bunch of MBA and master's students that were specifically interested in climate change, sustainability, clean energy, et cetera, kind of all different flavors of that. In a specific program, specializing and helping kind of them get their foot in the door. And I certainly my team, I can pretty confidently say that everybody on my team is passionate about, the impact that we can have on the environment with all the work that we do with our partners, and get a lot of interest from new students that are just now starting to look into the industry and want to chat about different avenues to be doing that. So obviously there's strong need for a lot more talent, and talent can certainly be hard to come by these days. But I do think we're seeing a good shift, particularly in the university level, to get a lot more folks kind of the basics of whether it's environment or climate change or the energy grid, to even have some of those basic capabilities kind of right from the get-go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something I've noticed a lot with I kind of spin around in a lot of communities of more young professionals kind of trying to figure out what they want to do, and I've noticed that a lot of people have no idea that half of these jobs even are jobs, right? So
Totally.
I always wonder if there's some type of programs that might be created. I know there's some universities that do this pretty well, but programs where people can very early on get exposure to these things and like see actually what's out there, because generally people grow up depending on their circumstances thinking there's probably five or six career options, right? So
Totally. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's part of the reason why I spend a lot of time on it. Obviously, I manage a team, and it's helpful me to build a pipeline of potential candidates. But effectively, every time that I go to one of those events, a ton of people reach out and be like, "I had no idea any of this stuff existed. This is super interesting." And I can talk about kind of my time at Nest and the various different types of roles within Google that support this business, which are a lot. Like there's sales folks, marketing folks, product roles, engineering roles, strategy, product planning, which are all different kind of facets that we have within the business to really kind of make it all go. But then if you expand it beyond that, utilities, which we already talked about, can still be really a great on-ramp, in my opinion, particularly if you're interested in energy and clean energy, to just get a very helpful foundation for just how energy system works in the US, or their partners. So the way that we work with our utility clients is not typically directly. So we'll actually just work with their partners, whether it's their demand response aggregator, because they work with the demand response aggregator so that they don't have to work with every single OEM that has a smart thermostat that's available. They just work with one aggregator, and then we have a contract with them. Or partners like energy marketplace partners who create white labeled e-commerce websites for utilities so that it's easier for their consumers to get the discounts and rebates on their product right when they're in the checkout process, versus on their website in a confusing checkout flow, which nobody really knows how to find and all this kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Typical utility websites, right?
Yes.
I always find it super interesting. There's so much innovation that can be had in these large companies, right? And even in small governments too. I feel like this is to me a fascinating problem, is it's so overlooked, those jobs, by oftentimes very intelligent, very like go get them type of people, because they don't want to be in what's considered to be slow or slow moving, right? They're just those people who go for those jobs are looking for something steady, kind of always going to be their type
Yeah.
of thing. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really look forward to the future of that kind of partnerships happening.
Totally agree. And the other type of partner that I think is really great, foundational, that we work with would be program implementers. So utilities don't typically run all the operations of their energy efficiency or demand response programs on their own. They'll outsource that to companies like ClearResult, Franklin Energy, ICF, and then a whole bunch of smaller firms. Those can be really great entry-level jobs for students coming right out, because they can, and honestly, even get a lot of the same exposure as you would working directly at a utility, but then working with multiple different utilities, because you're running a handful of different programs for ClearResult, for example. You can really get a great sense of how stuff is actually done and what's required to get the action from consumers or customers like commercial industrial partners as well.
Yeah. I guess maybe to wrap things up a little bit, what do you find from your knowledge of, maybe let's probably talk about it from the grid perspective, grid relationship with residential users. What are some of the big, huge areas for improvement or technological advancement to help increase that relationship and improve that, maybe that two-way street instead of just a one-way street going power to? Like,
Yeah.
coming in the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think are some big areas that either need innovation or have innovation coming that you're excited for?
Yeah. So the reason that I get excited to come into work every day is really about connecting the helpful home to the future of the grid. When you talk about smart home technology and really where the market is right now, it's still early days. 6 years ago, we used to talk about the smart thermostat really being the entry for consumers into the smart home, and that's still mostly the case, particularly for energy management. So I know that we already talked about the massive potential on the residential side for that, and I really think we're in the early innings of figuring out, both from a policy level, but then also just from a program level, like how do we really get millions of consumers enrolled in these programs and actively participating, starting with the stuff that works and is proven today, like smart thermostats, but also then getting their EVs either in a demand response program or on the right rate and coordinating accordingly to what the grid needs, but then also storage, et cetera, balancing all that with maybe they have solar on the roof, et cetera. So I think there's a ton of opportunity there, and that is really what we're focused on helping unlock. The other key driver, we talked about reliability and resiliency being a key driver, but the other aspect for why we see and we're so bullish on the upside opportunity is the last stat I saw from SEPA is that 51 utilities have goals to be carbon free or net zero emissions by 2050. That's so many more that have planted a stake in the ground and they're putting plans in place to be carbon free than even just a handful of years ago. And what we're seeing from a few of our key partners that have done that a little bit more aggressively, basically what they're doing is saying, all right, here's our goal, and then they're backing into how they're going to hit some of those metrics, and they're looking at their residential programs and realizing that they need to 10x or 100x participation in those programs to really get the outcome of carbon free that they're looking for. So companies like Consumers Energy and APS in Arizona, we've been partnering with them the last couple of years to really accelerate their residential programs and have seen 10x, 4x jumps in kind of their prior enrollment rates. So I'm really bullish on that as just a trend in potential in market, and really figuring out what can we be doing as an industry to help unlock that.
Yeah, I think it's almost that makes a lot of sense to me. Also, if you're looking at it from they're trying to be carbon neutral, I work in the ESG space too sometimes, and if they're looking to do that, I feel like having these programs could help them to at least track the data to show, to their reporting. And many people may not be familiar with their ESG reporting data, but to have that data to be able to report it. But also, you look at a lot of large commercial industrial owners, right? There's many solutions for them to manage their energy more efficiently, because obviously there's broader margins to be had there for savings. But also, why shouldn't there be something similar that could be used for residential homeowners, right? To basically, when they're setting up their home or upgrading their home, to make it more environmentally conscious or just more efficient across the board, right? There's probably a relatively short checklist of some of the big things that could be done, I'm assuming. And I feel like that'll be really good to empower homeowners that way. So yeah, I think pretty awesome conversation. Anything you want to add kind of in closing here?
Not that I can think of. We talked about most of the things that our teams are really excited about accelerating, from smart thermostat adoption, demand response programs, and then kind of next generation programs like Nest Renew to help really educate and automate and simplify for consumers on how they can do their part without making things too complicated.
Yeah, it sounds pretty easy. Honestly, if anybody's not reaching out, that's on them. This sounds like everybody should be contacting it after this episode. So anyways, thank you so much for coming on, Aaron. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing what Nest continues to do, especially excited personally for maybe the innovation of that pairing, how the home works and everything. I'm excited to see that. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Happy to chat.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining on today's episode. Really hope you enjoyed the conversation with Aaron. If you would like to continue hearing more conversations like this, please do subscribe and turn on notifications for further episodes. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, we always appreciate a rating and a review. It really does help us grow the reach. Please, of course, share this episode with anyone you think could find it interesting. I think especially if anybody knows people who work at the utilities, that could be looking to implement these kind of partnerships, do share this with them. I think that could be very valuable. If you want to get further involved, you can reach out and join our Slack channel in the description, and you can subscribe to the newsletter, which comes out every month, discussing climate tech topics in a bit more detail. And then you can connect with Aaron on LinkedIn, of course, and visit the Google Nest website to learn more for yourself. There's a lot of really actually interesting educational bits on that website, so I definitely recommend that. And of course, you can reach me anytime you want on Twitter with your questions. Just a quick shout out. Next episode is going to be with Zach Lefrevre, the CEO and founder of ChargeLab. ChargeLab is basically a software company that is integratable with all the major EV charging equipment companies. They're kind of like a one-stop shop for EV charging in general. Really, really fascinating conversation coming up in the next episode, so stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for listening to Clean Techies, the podcast.